Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mission Critical. Make sure to hit like below and subscribe for more updates from our show. Let's get into it. Hello, how are you both doing today?
Great, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, likewise.
I'm so excited for our chat today because we were just discussing off camera that this is a subject that I think a lot of people are very interested in, confused about, like have lots of different opinions about. It's like kind of like a polarizing topic, it seems like, and everyone has an opinion about it, even if they're not necessarily informed about it. So I'm also just personally very interested in this topic. But so glad to have you on our show, Aimee and Amanda. How's everything going? Where are you zooming in from today?
So I'm coming in from North Vancouver, and Amy's coming in from Interior BC.
Yeah, I live in a mountain town called Revelstoke, BC. Amanda and I first met when we were both practicing in downtown Vancouver at the same law firm. But about 8 years ago, I took the jump and moved a little bit east into a mountain town for lifestyle reasons.
I mean, that's a great lifestyle. I
Yeah,
love the
it
mountain
was a great
lifestyle.
choice. Yeah, 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Yeah. So maybe we can just start off with talking about, if you can just introduce yourself as well as your company, and essentially like if you had to summarize it into an elevator pitch, what would it be?
Sure. So, my name's Aimee Schalles. I'm a practicing lawyer in British Columbia. As I mentioned, I live in Revelstoke. I operate a small law firm there, and we focus mainly on the types of things that everyday people need. One of those things that has been a part of my practice has been family law. And I have seen throughout the years a lot of people come in with agreements that they've pulled offline, that they've tried to make themselves, that they're looking for a lawyer's help in finalizing. I've also had a lot of friends, being in my late 30s, who've gone through separations and who've seen how difficult they are and tried to navigate things on their own, not only because a lawyer is expensive, but also because that's what they want to choose for their relationship and their separation. And so Amanda and I worked together to start Jointly, which is an online platform that allows people to create cohabitation agreements, prenuptial agreements, and post-nuptial agreements on their own terms and in the comfort of their own home. And we're going to go through that a little bit later. But my experience practicing as a lawyer is part of what motivated me to start Jointly. I knew there had to be a better way because people were doing things on their own. And but they were using low quality templates and needed something that was a little more accessible, but yet they knew had some high quality family law education and some drafting behind it. And that was motivated by Amanda's experience. And Amanda, I'll let you take over and tell your story.
Yes, hi. So I am Amanda Barron, also a practicing lawyer, and my motivation was a lot more personal. I went through a very contentious divorce a few years ago, and even though I had been to law school, I didn't have a prenup, which is pretty embarrassing now thinking about it. But looking back, when I met my former partner, we were both, just starting our careers. We met in university, and I thought to myself, this isn't really for people like me. Like, why would I need a prenup? I'm, 27. I don't have anything, no assets to my name or what have you. And then, fast forward a few years, went through a really contentious divorce and wished that I had one. And, wouldn't have changed some of the things that made a separation hard, of course. A separation is always difficult and it's emotionally challenging and all of that. But what it would have done is really streamline the process of, who gets what, how does the next phase look? We can move forward into that really quickly instead of what happened to me, which was 2 years to get a separation agreement finalized. So throughout that process, I was talking a lot with Aimee and some other friends, and we just thought, there's got to be something that makes this process of getting a prenup or cohabitation agreement easier for people, less controversial, and lets people know that it's not just for rich people, it's for anyone, and it can really help you streamline things if you separate down the road.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I mean, why don't we start with when I feel like a lot of people think about a prenup, for example, at least for me, the first thing that comes to mind is like the splashy headlines and like a lot of like the celebrity prenups and like just who gets X amount of houses and boats or whatever it might be. And it's always through the lens of like a really healthy asset base. Why do you think prenups have been so misunderstood for so long?
Well, to kind of touch on that point, Lance, um, I think, yeah, we hear about them a lot in terms of wealthy people, but I think in
Hmm.
some respects they're more important for people who don't have multiple houses and whatnot. For ordinary folks like us, finances are a lot more tight, and that one home that you've really scrimped and saved for, if that's at jeopardy, or your retirement savings, that's a lot bigger deal to for those of us who don't have as much to lose, right? So having a clear path forward for that is it in many respects more helpful than for someone who's got lots and they can say, well, you get the house in Cabo and I'll take the one in New York, that kind of thing, right? Um, to be frank, I think I don't know why they've been uncommon to this point, other than just the general trend of that it's taboo to talk about money, as particularly amongst boomers. And I think that that's changing as we go on through time in different generations. That millennials and Gen Z are more open in discussing their finances than ever, and have indicated publicly that they're more interested in that kind of thing. And I think they're going into a tougher economy where they really have got to work hard to save a house or to gain full time non gig employment, and that it's more important for them to be really clear up front about these things.
I mean, in a world where, so many people protect everything from their phones to their pets, why do you think so many people still skip out on legal protection when it comes to their relationships, which is one of the most important things in your life feasibly?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it is that, unromantic kind of framing that prenups have that, this is me planning for a divorce and it's not generous. It's me, piling my wealth in a corner and making sure you can't touch it. It's this kind of concept around what is a prenup when really a prenup can be used for a lot of things. It can be used actually to protect each other. So, one thing that we talk about a lot in our educational content is that prenups can be used to kind of spread out financial risks of things that happen in relationships. So if you have a child, for example, historically the financial penalty of having a kid is borne by the women. The women take time off of work. They're going to be paid less overall as soon as they become a mom. There's like a parenting tax that has been applied exclusively to women. So if you're making a prenup, you could say, hey, I acknowledge that you're going to be taking this time off to have our children. You're going to be bearing them. Maybe you'll be taking a little bit more time out of the workforce. Mat leave is a little longer than pat leave. Let's make sure when we make our agreement that we, make allowance for you to have some extra support when you leave the relationship. So that burden isn't always placed on the woman forever. So it can actually be used to
Mhm.
protect each other. It's not just, me shoving my wealth in the corner and saying none for you. It's like, hey, how do we share the risk of, the financial choices that we're making together? How do we balance this out over time? How do we protect each other while we're together and after the relationship?
And you make an interesting point there, Lance, in that everybody, you have insurance that protects you in the event you get in a car accident. That doesn't mean that you want to get in a car accident or that you think you're going to. You have it there just in case. And, I think it's an act of love and kindness to be upfront and discuss these finances and assets and debts with your partner. It's the bedrock of a good relationship is open communication about these things. And, just like anything, another good example is a will. You wouldn't Everybody wants to make a will so that when if they something happens to them that it's straightforward and easy for their family to administer the process. So why wouldn't you do the same for yourself if a relationship ends? Make a prenup. You're not planning on that happening, of course not, but at least you've created a clear path and an easier framework for yourself going forward in the event that it does. So it's definitely a conversation that we're trying to have, and a narrative that we're trying to change, because we really do see the benefit in them for everybody as part of the foundation of a solid relationship.
Yeah, because it seems like so much of the discourse is through the lens of, well, through like a very negative, kind of cold uh, lens of, separation. Obviously, the separation part is a big, part of this discourse. But do you think that the narrative needs to be, I guess, quote unquote, rebranded so that it's seen through the lens of like a positive experience and an experience that can protect couples while they're together versus through the lens of separation. Like, does that make sense? Am I making
Totally,
that question
totally.
make sense?
And I think part of the reason why it maybe feels that way is because the traditional process is you each getting your own lawyer and you each go talk to your own lawyer individually. And then your lawyers are communicating about what this really deeply intimate thing that you're trying to decide together is about. And that feels weird and cold and impersonal and a bit adversarial. I am a lawyer. I try not to make it be that way, but I know that that's the way that it's taken sometimes. And by going about this from a different direction where people can create this on their own, I think that's part of changing the conversation. It's not just like about cost, it's about accessibility and approaching this conversation in a way that feels loving and collaborative. So you can use our platform and go through that together and have those discussions in advance of seeking some legal advice or whatnot. But it feels more natural and less a little bit like what yours is yours, mine and mine, and we're going to
Yeah.
communicate this way.
Well, and like also like yeah, like the narrative around like you're setting your relationship up to fail because you're already talking about the possibility of ending. Whereas why would you even consider that option if you're in a relationship? And that kind
Many
of
do. Like,
discourse. Yeah.
yeah, many relationships end in separation and divorce. Those are just the stats, right? And
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You know, if people don't have a separation agreement or a prenup or any kind of documentation put together, what is kind of the default legal framework that is usually in place when people don't have these things established within a couple?
So that changes province by province. And that's another reason we
Mm.
think it's really important for the education piece um, to get a bit more attention today, because we have more and more folks that are living together and not getting married. And in some provinces, that means that you have exactly the same rights as a married couple. So here in BC, if you've lived together for a couple of years, it's all the same under the law. It's just like you're married. Your property division rights are the same. Your spousal support rights are the same. But if you're in Ontario and you're not married and you're living together, you don't have those protections. You don't have those rights that you would have if you were married. So it really depends on which province you're in, what kind of rights you have under the law. And most people don't know that. I found when I've been explaining to friends as we're rolling out across the country that we have to change all of our materials based on every province because it's different. People are surprised, right? It's just not something that the everyday person thinks about.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
know that. I thought it
yeah,
was under like a common law kind of thing in Ontario where if you're together for a certain amount of time, you're basically legally considered pretty much like a married couple.
you
that's
can't
not
say no
that's not
to
accurate.
different. Depends where you live. Yeah, not in Ontario.
Oh, interesting. Okay. See,
So I
I'm
mean,
learning stuff already.
yeah. So I mean, like if you're in Ontario and you make a deliberate choice not to get married, which lots of people do for lots of different reasons, I think it's something that you really need to think hard about having a cohabitation agreement. If you're going to be building a life with someone over 20, 30 years, you might be in for an unpleasant surprise, both of you, at the end of it, making assumptions as to what you thought the law was and discovering what it isn't. And so we think it's particularly important for Ontario couples to have an agreement in place who aren't married.
Interesting. Okay, if we just kind of roll things back a little bit and rewind and just kind of start from the fundamentals, can you give us like maybe a prenup kind of 101? Like what exactly is it? What does it cover? How is it different from things like a will or a postnup or a cohabitation agreement? Or are some things interchangeable or not? Like how do people navigate the differences between these and the nuances between these things?
Sure. So the difference, we talked about prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, and cohabitation agreements. And the difference between those three is essentially timing. So a cohabitation agreement is an agreement that you make with a partner that you live with, but that you're not married, maybe never planning on getting married. A prenuptial agreement is something that's made in anticipation of marriage, within a few months of you getting married. And a postnuptial agreement is agreement that you make after you're already married. Other than that, they cover the same topics and essentially deal with what's going to happen if your relationship ends. So they will talk about things like spousal support. Should spousal support be paid if you separate? And spousal support, another term that people use, it's an American term, but they call it alimony. Should there be a monthly amount payable for the other person because there's maybe an imbalance in incomes or other reason? They'll also talk about property division. What property is shared, what property is kept separate, how it will be split, that sort of thing. With jointly and with many other types of these agreements, you can make special rules for certain things. So you may have a general rule about property, and then you make a special rule about your home, or a special rule about your business or your pension, so on and so forth. That's kind of the main things that they talk about is there going to be support payable, and how will our property be divided? How is someone going to move out? Things like that. Um, yeah, the agreement that you build on our platform, you can go through and select what you want it to say, and it spits out a fully formatted, customized, legally compliant agreement that you can then print and sign from there. So traditionally, the process of actually making a prenup starts with you having a conversation with your partner where you're going to disclose all your assets and your debts, because everybody needs to know what they're coming in with and what they're giving up. Then when that's done, you make the agreement. And then from there, once you've signed it, it's important to review it on a regular basis to make sure that it continues to reflect what your circumstances are. If there's been a big change because someone's staying home with the child, like Amanda pointed out earlier, or somebody's no longer able to work because they got sick, things like that. It's important to update them. They're a living, I shouldn't say they're a living document because they are what they are, but they are something that's meant to be revisited as life goes on, and as you continue to have conversations about financial planning with your partner and where life's headed for both of you.
And can you make changes to them as frequently as you want, or is there a certain limitation to how often that can be updated?
Yeah, you can and should make changes regularly throughout the course of your relationship. Importantly, like Aimee said, when circumstances change significantly. So if you have a child and you maybe weren't expecting that when you wrote your first agreement, or someone wins the lottery and leaves the workforce, or someone, gets an illness and has to take a significant time out of the workforce, or takes time out to care for aging parents, or, for other responsibilities in their lives. So you should be going through regularly whenever you have a big change in circumstance. And if you don't, if life goes exactly how you expected it would when you made your agreement, there's still a little form that we include with our jointly agreements that says, yes, we've taken a look at this. Yes, we've discussed it, and we decided that it's still exactly in line with how we want to plan for our future. And you sign off on that to say, everybody's still on board, everybody's still on the same page, and we can keep moving forward with what we have.
Right, right. And when you consider the different types of people that are, embarking on this journey, who are these agreements ultimately for, and who should be considering them, but maybe aren't like obviously couples, but like, are there different dynamics or different scenarios, or, you know, is it as simple as just saying like all couples should be considering it, or are there kind of
Yes.
more nuances to that? Okay.
Yes, that's our answer, but there are some times where it's particularly important. One of them I talked about a few minutes ago. If you're what people call a common law couple in a place like Ontario, extra important. Before you buy a home or another major purchase like that with your partner, it's important. If one of you is going to take time out of the workforce to have children, that's a good time to revisit it, even after you're already married. If you're getting married later in life and you're both established financially and intend to keep things separate, that's another great time to have it. Um, the last great example I have is if you're moving somewhere because your partner got transferred and your career is going to be impacted, or you have to step back from your career in order to facilitate that for your family, that's a great time to revisit that and say, okay, maybe in the event that we separate, I need some spousal support because I'm giving up a higher earning career to follow you in your career. Those are all situations where people particularly need to think about it, but we really do think that everybody could benefit from it because, even if you don't think that you have much and you're content to have an agreement that follows whatever the default laws in your province say, it's still useful to have this document, to go through the process of discussing it, and to have this document that says, at the very least, this is what we both brought into the relationship. This is the debt I'm bringing in. These are the assets I'm bringing in, and those are mine to keep if we separate. And the reason I say that is because I've seen lots in my legal practice where people separate after 10 or 15 years and everyone's trying to think what they brought into the relationship will be excluded, and no one has that information, and you can't get bank records that go back that far. So if only you're going to clarify what you bring in and clarify that you understand what the default laws are and you want them to apply to you, we think that's an extremely useful exercise.
Mm-hmm. It kind of occurred to me that, when I think about this conversation, it's about, a couple discussing kind of like who gets what, or who gets accounted for what. But is it also fair to say that that you're also talking about who is not responsible for something? Like, a debt, or I don't know, something that might be a curveball down the road if you haven't otherwise, talked about it.
Yeah,
Letting Aimee do that one because she handles a lot more direct advice.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, like, I think it's, you may not know if that someone's coming in with this huge student loan debt, and that could continue to accrue interest that potentially you could be responsible down the line. And yeah, it's totally useful. Um, to have just not only know what that amount is, but just to kind of do this gut check to say, listen, we're going to make some big commitment by buying a house, and this person's got a ton of credit card debt and a ton of student loan debt, and like, are we really aligned in terms of how we view finances? And of course, it's never. We think this can be a collaborative, productive conversation, but at least it forces you to have that conversation early on to get on the same page about things, and to have as a backstop, to have there to be clear that you are not responsible for those things in the event that someone's trying to change their spending habits and they just can't at the end of the day. You have some peace to know that that goes with them, and you get to keep your saving habits and everything that's accrued as a result of that.
Yeah, like the liabilities associated with a partner in a relationship that would not necessarily be, quote unquote, fair to transfer onto or equally distribute should the two separate.
Yeah, and it's generally the case in most jurisdictions that whatever you bring in is yours to keep in any event. But what an increase in debt during the relationship can be split, and so maybe you want to just be really mindful of that huge line of credit is just over there. You're not going to be responsible for it, and any interest that accrues or anything of that sort. That's just that person's altogether, no matter what happens during the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What were or what have been like traditional, like what was the traditional legal process like for creating a prenup, and how does something like jointly turn that around on its head, or really just make that process, you know, simpler, easier, less confusing, and also intimidating? Like how does a business like yours smooth out those wrinkles, so to speak?
Hmm. We've tried to come at all of the pain points that people experience in the traditional process in a few different ways. So I'll start with what is the traditional process. And typically, what happens is each person will go to their own individual lawyer to get advice on what family law is in their province, what is in their best interest in an agreement, and get some direction on that. And then the two lawyers will negotiate on behalf of the couple about what their agreement should say. So this tends to take, weeks, if not months. You see couples going into lawyer appointments, during the workday when they would otherwise be at their office. They have to take time off to go meet with their lawyers. There can be a lot of, telephone issues, right? If you're not talking directly to your partner, but you're having lawyers talk on your behalf, so it can be, it can add tension. It can be confusing. It can be kind of alienating. And also, it's going to cost you about $3,000 based on our research. So it's something that is not within financial reach of many people and not something that they consider comfortable. So what we've done is we've tried to take away a lot of that friction. So the first thing that we built as part of Jointly was a kind of prenup tutorial, or a quick, dive into what do these agreements say, what do they do, what's the law in your province, what kind of arrangements can you make for yourselves, and why might you choose some options over the other, right? Like why might it be appropriate for two people who come later in life with established careers to choose one thing, which is to keep all their property separate, or why might folks who are coming in early, we know someone's going to be taking time off to have kids, stepping away from the workforce, why might they choose something else? So we've kind of gone through and set that all out in a tutorial format that's available for free on our website. You just sign up for an account and we'll take you through how every type of agreement works and all your choices. And then we've also built an agreement builder. So once you've gone through the educational content, yes, this makes sense for me. Yes, this is the kind of prenup that we want. This is how we want to set up our arrangements. You spend about 20 minutes filling out our agreement builder, which just asks you some quick questions about, your background. What's your employment? What kind of assets do you have? What does your family look like? Do you have kids? Do you have pets? And we set out what kind of arrangements you want to make for them. So you learn about it, you fill out a quick questionnaire. It generates a plain language, fully formatted, legally compliant agreement. Um, I can say that. Uh, that covers everything that you've talked about. And our process takes the cost from $3,000 down to about $379. So we've tried to come in at about 10% of the cost of a traditional agreement. It's comfortable, you build it together, it's in plain language, words that you can understand. And we've tried to take out all those barriers to make it easier, comfortable, accessible to people.
Yeah, yeah. So, from a user experience standpoint, when a couple logs on, like what happens when a couple logs on, so they get the tutorial, what happens further down the road, or even what happens before the point where they decide to go onto your site, like they have a discussion about, is this considered like estate planning, or is that a completely different thing?
That's a bit different because that's meant to kick in when you die. We
Yeah,
think this
okay.
is more like relationship planning. It's a yeah,
Relationship planning. Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. So the decision to have a discussion about relationship planning happens first, and then they go onto your site. Then they have kind of like a tutorial, a 101 on prenups, and then they kind of go through the whole process. Like, is that kind of how the user experience works, essentially?
Yeah, yeah, pretty well. So we have a bunch of articles on our website that, if you're not sure, that you can, just read generally about relationship agreements and prenups, and use those as tools to help to have that first discussion with your partner. And then you can get started for free. You on a sign up, you can get started and access the course to learn some more and determine, yeah, this is what we want to do and this is what we wanted to say. In addition, we give you a bunch of worksheets to help you really set out a clear list of your assets, your debts, and same for your partner, because that's, as I mentioned before, a really key part of the process. And then from there, you can access the agreement builder, build your agreement, print, sign, get independent legal advice if you wish, not mandatory in every province, and be on your way.
So I guess outside of the kind of the 101 that's provided at the beginning of that journey, what kind of other bits of guidance or safeguards are there in place to make sure people feel like they understand what they're essentially like agreeing to, and also that they know that it's legally sound or legally enforceable, all those kinds of things?
Well,
Sure.
one thing, I'll start off and then I'll let Aimee go. But one thing that we've done is we've gotten approval from the Law Society of Ontario. So they've taken a look at our platform and decided, yes, this is safe for the public to use. Yes, there's sufficient trust in place. This is a good and reliable product that you can use. And another piece is that Aimee and I drafted everything. We're both practicing lawyers. We put together the agreement. We looked at all the clauses. There's nothing in there that's generated by AI. What you're getting is something that was drafted, by a lawyer. Not for you. It's not legal advice. It's not tailored to you, but it is a high quality drafted document. So what we've done is couple the here's how it works, here's the decisions you can make and why you might make them, and then the quick building process where you're answering questions and getting a lawyer designed agreement.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think is like a myth or a misconception that you see holding a lot of couples back from even starting the process?
Mine is that people think that a prenup is about taking a defensive position about trying to keep things from other people, and I just don't think that's true. It can be a way to express to your partner that you value their unpaid contributions to a business that you own by saying expressly that they can have a share of it. That you value their emotional labor in raising children by saying that you'll give spousal support. That you recognize each other's contributions by agreeing to share things. It's not always, not every prenup is what's mine is what yours is yours. And I know that's the way that they're commonly seen. And I think that's why there's some taboo associated with them, because that doesn't feel very loving. And having an open and frank financial conversation and um, setting out an agreement that gives your partner something can actually be a very loving act.
Right. What about you, Amanda? What's another myth or misconception?
Yeah, I think I have two favorites. One is that it's the one we mentioned earlier, is that prenups are planning for divorce or separation, and I don't think that's true. And the other is that prenups are only for people who have a lot of assets, and we've kind of covered both of these things. But I think instead of seeing it as divorce planning, failure planning, things that are only for the wealthy, it should be just a normal part of your financial planning with your partner, right? Like if you're sitting down and thinking about, okay, how are we going to afford having children? How are we going to save for a mat leave? What are we going to do to afford a house? And what kind of house do we want to buy? And what do our retirement plans look like? How much money do we think we need to have and where should we have it? At the same time, you could be sitting down and saying, and hey, what if, at some point we go our separate ways? How are we going to make sure that both of us are okay? So it just doesn't need to be this scandalous, we're planning to break up, where, I'm hiding my chateau in France from you. It's just a conversation for normal people to have when they're making other normal, impactful financial decisions in their lives.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and what do you say to people that, you know, or someone that might be like, but I trust in you, and why would we need a prenup? And then to your point earlier, like this is just planning, setting us up for failure, or all that kind of stuff. Like, what's the first thing you say to something like that? Or in an instance where there's a couple and one person is very much for it and another person is like very much against it, like how do you help people navigate that dynamic?
Yeah, well, to start, I would say that both people have to agree. And so you're going to have to find a way, whether that's through some couples counseling or some resources on our site, to start that conversation in a way that maybe brings the other person on board if you're the person who wants to have a prenup. And I think if you can frame it from the perspective of like, listen, this is part of financial planning and we're having this conversation as part of that, instead of like, I want a prenup, you better lawyer up, that kind of thing. That tone and how you go about it can make all the difference. But to your first point there, what do you say to people who say, listen, we've discussed it and I've got a promise and they'd never do that to me? I just say I've seen lots of examples of that going south on people. I know a number of people who said, "Listen, we had a deal where we would keep our finances separate. We never planned on having kids. We never planned on getting married." And then they split, and the gloves are off, and all of a sudden, that person, their ex, wants a share of the increase in equity of their home because the housing market went crazy. And during their relationship, they didn't buy a home because they were living in the home that their partner already owned. And so they're on the outside of the market and the other person's in. And all I'd say is it's a lot easier to make an agreement when you're getting along than when you're not. And I just have seen it happen often that people are surprised by that. So, our view is that a promise is good, but a legal agreement is better.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point, these conversations change, and the tone and the words that are used, I'm sure, can deeply impact the course of that conversation as well, and how people approach that topic. um I wanted to kind of like zoom out a little bit too. If we look at just like the general discourse around relationship planning and the general discourse, I guess, about also, if you zoom out even more from that, just talking about money, how do you think we can just change and or shift our culture around being more comfortable around having these discussions and normalizing these discussions more often?
I think that culture is already changing, and to see that, you can just look to all the personal finance kind of content creators online that have proliferated in the last few years, and they're providing this really valuable resource. They're educating people about money and the impacts of money on their lives, and they're destigmatizing it at the same time. So if we look at the stats around, Gen Z and millennials, they're way more likely to want a prenup, which is interesting. A survey came out from TD Bank this year saying that they're of Gen Z, about 51% of them expect to have a prenup or a cohabitation agreement, which is a big increase over younger generation or older generations. Um, but I think it's just this generation coming up, they need to be financially savvier because of the conditions that they're living in, right? It's $1 million to buy a home now. So you're not buying your first house with your partner for $200,000. You're making a huge investment. And it requires a lot more communication, a lot more understanding. And I think that that is, contributing in a really positive way to people talking about money in their relationships earlier.
Yeah, yeah. I know the top. I feel like there's a few different things that society is, when it comes to talking about it. There's still just so much taboo, weirdly, and like money is one of them. Um, I mean, politics. Talking about politics, that's like kind of like one of those dinner table conversation no nos. But I do feel like those conversations are opening up and are
Mhm.
becoming, those channels are becoming more accessible, and people. I mean, it just feels like it's becoming a little bit more normalized, and as a result, these conversations don't feel as like, I don't know, quote unquote cringy, or as intimidating to kind of navigate as well.
And everyone knows someone who's been through a tough separation. In
Hmm.
my friend group, it's me. So you're welcome, everyone, for the education. But people have had their parents go through contentious divorces, or their aunt and uncle, or everyone's seen it. Everyone's seen the consequences of a separation gone poorly, and I think it's just practical to avoid it, right? It's not you're not betting against yourself, but you are looking at the numbers and saying, hey, it seems to me based on the stats that we can't always predict exactly how our lives are going to go. And that's not saying anything about your partner or about your relationship. It's just being practical.
Yeah, yeah, pragmatic. In terms of like the different considerations as well, outside of like a romantic kind of personal assets standpoint, if you're a business owner, and I actually had this conversation with a friend of mine a few months ago, actually coincidentally, about when she started her business with her co-founders, setting up legal protection so that their respective spouses could not, if they ever separated, could not come after the company. And that to me, I was like, I didn't even consider that. So if we talk about business owners and entrepreneurs, like what's at stake for them who don't have something like a prenup in place?
Yeah, I think it's particularly important that they think about this kind of thing. Because, say, when your relationship starts and your business isn't worth very much, but then it grows a lot. And even if you have an agreement with your business partners that vis a vis you and your business partners, your spouse can't come in and take over, you're still likely, in the event of a separation, going to have to pay out part of the value of the increase of that business. And there's lots of different ways you can deal with that. And sometimes that's offset against other assets and whatnot. But as a business owner, you need to make sure that the value of this business is not just about money, it's your livelihood. And if you don't have the ability to pay that partner out or to protect and say that the business is yours, you could lose your ability to participate in that business vis-a-vis your other shareholders, and like that's it, then you're looking for a job. And most people who've been down that entrepreneurship path, they don't want to go back to that route. And so it's particularly important that you have that conversation with your spouse and set out clearly what that is. And maybe your arrangement is that they get to keep the equity in the house, but you've got that equity in the business set out so that you don't have to, those can balance against each other, so that that your opportunity to participate there is still protected.
hmm
Does that
And
make
what
sense?
about, yeah, I think it makes sense. And then what about in the instance of like, you talk about a circumstance where a business valuation may have gone up during the course of a relationship, but what if a business goes like bankrupt or something towards the end of a relationship, and then there's like the actual liability, like it goes in the opposite direction? Is a partner, I guess because your assets are shared, is a partner responsible for kind of the legal implications of that?
Yeah, that can be a really complicated answer depending on how the business is set
Mm,
up and
yeah,
structured. So there's no really one size fits all answer there. But the gist of it is that if you do take debt on in a relationship,
yeah.
that is something that can be shared. So it's very common in business financing that even if you have a separate entity set up, that you're personally guaranteeing. And so if something goes sideways and the bank starts looking to you personally to fulfill that and coming after you, that could be debt that a partner has to participate in. So yeah, these things are all very complicated and very like situation specific, but it's a discussion worth having with your partner, knowing what's going on in their business, and at least having that clearly set out in your agreement to make clear that any liabilities associated with the business may or may not be part of what's divided in the pot for the prenup, right? Because that's something, a chance that they're taking that you're not participating in, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think we've kind of been talking about these agreements, obviously being between the two people in a relationship. But how often do you see instances where families get involved, or parents wanting to help plan for their for the future for their kids? How do prenups help protect something like inheritance in the future, or as we've talked about, property, or just even help reduce kind of conflict or tension that might arise with the family down the road?
Yeah, it's a really common moment for folks to seek a prenup or a cohabitation agreement is when their parents are giving them a nice little gift to help them buy a house. So that comes up a lot. There's pressure from parents to say, okay, but this is for you. This is an early inheritance, and we want you to get a prenup so we know for sure that if something doesn't work out, this stays with you. And so that I do think that that comes up quite frequently, and I think it's from a
Mhm.
practical place. The law does typically, keep inheritances separately from your family property, but that doesn't always stay true if you use it to purchase shared assets. So if you got an inheritance and used it to buy a family home, for example, you lose that kind of exclusion to say my inheritance is for me if you use it something for the family,
Right.
unless you have it set out in a prenup.
Right. There's so many things that can be covered within just this one document.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
It's
it's amazing, right? And people just don't. It's things that happen in your everyday life that you don't think about, right? Like it's you're excited to buy your home, you're getting ready, you've got this nice gift from your parents, and off you go, and you don't think about that by doing that you could be putting half of it at risk. It's just not something that even comes to mind for most people.
Totally. And I think sometimes we do see parents driving that conversation because they have seen it happen. If they're older, they've seen more of their friends go through it, or maybe they went through it at some point and they say, like, listen, I know you're really excited. We're happy to help you out, but have you thought about this? It's like, take the rose colored glasses off and let's just think with a practical mindset here. This is just something to think about so that it's clear in advance, because that kind of thing where parents are giving money to help their kids get started in life is something that happens all the time. But it's worth everybody having a really frank discussion and documenting at the time what exactly is intended and what will happen if things go sideways.
Yeah. And I imagine the conversation gets a bit more nuanced when you are talking about couples that are a little bit like later in life, like relationships, because the diversity of assets are different, or you might also have kids at that point too. What makes prenups especially powerful for these individuals?
Well, that's the thing, is that even if it's a first relationship, people are getting married and settling down later than ever before. More people are starting their
Hmm.
careers and whatnot, so people are just coming at this from a different perspective than our parents' generation was, where they're getting married younger and you're building everything together. So that's a starting point. But yeah, if you're coming into this and you've both been in relationships before and both have kids, very many people want to protect and make sure that what they have and what they've built is there for their kids and not necessarily the other person. Many of those people too have also just experienced the pain of a separation and know how it can be, and know that they want a prenup just to streamline the process and prevent pain going forward. If something were to happen, they've lived it. They realize it can happen even with the best of intentions, and they're just a lot more savvy about these kind of things, and recognize that the practicality is what's important in those circumstances.
And that's also where prenups and relationship planning can fit in with estate planning, right? It can be part of they're kind of complementary documents, right? You should be doing them together, especially in the situation of a blended family. You can set out in your prenup or your cohabitation agreement that these are my assets that I'm bringing in. I'm leaving them for my kids. This. We put in provisions here about what we're going to put in our wills. So you're not going to come later and challenge my will if I pass away and try to get the money that I saved for my children. So you can set out both of those things kind of in complementary planning documents.
Yeah. And similarly, you could also say in your will, listen, if we're still together and I die, you get this property. But in the event that we split, it's not your property, right? So the documents can work together by saying opposite things based on the different trajectories your life might take.
Right, right. All very interesting. I want to also just touch on your experience building the company as well. What have been some of the challenges and roadblocks as opposed to some of the big wins and opportunities that you've realized throughout your experience?
Well, I think, well, let's start with the wins because that's always fun. And the wins are that we are scrappy, as we like to say. We've been able to, it being 2025 and the advancement of technology out there, Amanda and I have been able to mostly build this ourselves. Obviously, built on a bedrock of, between the two of us, decades of legal experience for that technical knowledge. But we've been able to build and launch the platform on our own, and we're pretty proud of that. And that's been pretty fun to do. The challenge, I'd say, is that we legal services are a tightly regulated industry, and for good reason, to protect the public. So it's perhaps taken us longer than a company that's not in an industry like this would to launch, because we've had to go through a process of being very careful and working with regulators, and we consider that to be important as well, because we are lawyers,
Hmm.
and satisfying them as to the quality of our product and just the way our company's set up to provide protection to the public. So that's added some extra time to things. But we're really committed to making sure that that quality is there, and so it's just a fact of life in our line of work.
Mm. What about you, Amanda?
Yeah, there's some other great wins. Number one, Aimee and I get to work together again. So after starting our careers together, it's been really fun to build with a friend. And I think something that, has made the experience way more meaningful and more fun. So that's a real highlight. And also working with other small business owners. We've been meeting a lot of other founders in the legal tech space, and they've been so generous with their time and advice for us. So that has been absolutely wonderful and really inspirational for us.
Mm.
Yeah.
Actually, a good friend of mine that I went to school with because I went to school at University of Alberta, and he started a legal tech company called Good Lawyer, based out of Edmonton. And it
Yeah.
just seems like that space, just legal tech in general, is just it's there's a lot of exciting things happening there.
There's a lot of exciting things happening because I think everybody's realizing that the way that law is practiced in the past needs to do some catching up to the way that the rest of the world operates. And I've certainly seen that in my own practice. And I love to use technology to try and bring law to people in a way that's more affordable and accessible in terms of meeting them in the way that they like to approach these kind of decisions and conversations in their life. So that's pretty exciting for me. And that kind of view is becoming more and more common in the legal profession. So yeah, there's big room for growth there.
Mm.
I think we're
Did you?
still a bit black sheep, though. I think there are some folks in the legal profession who are quite resistant to change,
Yeah.
and so we do take the position that we're not a replacement for lawyers. We're an alternate service. We're meeting more people in different ways, and particularly we have advantages for meeting people with lower incomes or people in rural communities where they might not have access to legal services. But we can't replace a lawyer. If you've got a really complex asset structure, if you've got a family trust, if you're living on reserve, online services can't replace a lawyer for you. You need custom legal advice in some situations. But we're trying to bridge the gap and make an affordable option for people who have kind of standard assets, who don't need anything complicated and otherwise wouldn't seek the help of any legal services, might pull a PDF that's fillable online that's actually applicable to California instead of Ontario, and use something that's unreliable. So we see ourselves as a complement to legal services, and we're broadening the scope of services available within the legal industry, but we're not a replacement for lawyers in all circumstances.
And just opening the door for people to be able to even access, yeah, these
Totally.
services, as you mentioned, and in people, whether it's geographic or financial, like inabilities to have done so in the past, like everything's online now.
Yeah,
Exactly. The
totally.
people are using Questrade to manage their investments or Wealthsimple,
Hmm.
and they're, using PolicyMe to get insurance, and they're using Willful or Epilogue to get their wills, right? People are comfortable with these services. It feels better and more accessible for them than going to sit in some stuffy lawyer's office across
Yeah.
town. They've had to take an afternoon off work to drive in. It just isn't how people, in Gen Z and millennials are expecting to do businesses, and they're comfortable with digital platforms.
Yeah. As a starting point, I will reject the suggestion that my office is stuffy and uncomfortable to sit in. However, people have still told me that it's weird to start this conversation that way. So I will give you your point there. So, yeah.
Did you always, consider yourselves as entrepreneurial even before you started your company? Like, is that kind of the spirit of entrepreneurship something that you embraced throughout other parts of your career?
I mean, looking back, yes, I think Amanda and I both went into law to help people. And then when I started working at my small firm, I was like, wow, I love running a business. And
Mm,
I think that's come as a surprise to me. When I look back, way back, I can see I always had this in me and always had this interest. But but yeah, the entrepreneurship has been really fun, and that's because we get to do things on our terms in a way that is different from the way legal services are traditionally provided. That doesn't feel like the traditional way doesn't feel like a super great fit for us. I want to provide a service in the same way I like to consume other services, like the examples that Amanda mentioned it. So it
yeah.
feels good to do something that is helping to reach more people in a way that feels authentically us. And yeah, we love that.
How do you see jointly expanding? Like, do you want to kind of live within this space of like relationship agreements, or do you hope it, you know, do you have plans to kind of expand it into other spaces and kind of do what you've done within relationship agreements in other areas?
So our plans right now are to expand our offerings within the family services area. So we want to get into separation and divorce assistance. So for folks who are going through, fairly amicable splits that just need assistance making separation agreements. We'd like to build a similar platform for that to kind of take some of the pain out of that process. And then again, in line with the family services, we are hoping to add an independent legal advice kind of tier eventually to our platform. So if you go through the materials, you build your agreement, and you still want to have the assurance of talking to a lawyer and running through it, just to have that extra peace of mind. We're hoping to add a tier of service where we can do that, but still at a price that's a lot more accessible than what's available in traditional law firms.
Yeah, I feel like there's still so much that can be done within the space. I mean, I know a few people that have had uh, very amicable separations and divorces, but just the paperwork and like the kind of bureaucracy, even though they were all on the same page about everything, it was so painful for them to get through that process and just kind of one, have closure on one part of the lives, and then two, to be able to move on. And
Totally.
even though they were completely in agreement, it was just the paperwork, or I don't exactly know the minutia of it, but it seemed like it was very bureaucratic
Yeah,
in terms of that.
I see that all the time in my practice lands where people have everyone's in agreement. They want to resolve this peacefully. They've downloaded some template they find online, and then they take it to a bank because you need to have that as part of separating your mortgage. And the bank says, "This is not going to cut it. Go get something that's drafted better." And so then they end up in my office dealing with that. And they never wanted to have it go through lawyers, and they're just trying to keep it simple and get it over with. But they ended up finding something that was low quality online. And we hope to provide an alternative to that just yeah, still allows them to proceed with their separation in the way that they want to, that reflects their values and their commitment to do it peacefully with their ex.
Once you have your separation agreement like finalized, like what do you do with it? Like, do you put it, like, can you store it online? Because I know, a few years ago, I spoke with someone who is similarly in the same space, but for wills. And I don't know if this has changed since then, but in our discussion, she mentioned how you have to have a paper document, and it wasn't actually, you couldn't store these documents online or something like that. Is this the same case for separation agreements? Like, do you have to, and who holds it? Like, do you have to give it to someone that like is a neutral party that can oversee it? Like, how does that even work? And then where does it go after you've kind of come to terms with the agreement?
Yeah, that's changed in the will space. You can have fully digital executed online kind of will.
Okay, that's good. You don't have to
Yeah,
store it in your freezer anymore.
yeah. In the family law space, there's still weight put on the fact of it being witnessed by somebody. So there are some methods to witness things electronically, but to be frank, it is the easiest to just print it and sign it in front of your friend who's going to act as a witness. There hasn't been the same modernization in family law as there was in wills because of the pressures that came about as a result of the pandemic.
Hmm. Interesting.
But you don't have to store it in your freezer.
No.
A digital copy, once you've signed it and witnessed it in person, is fine. It is a
Okay.
little bit more modern in that way.
Yeah.
It's important that you both keep copies of it. It's important that you'll have to give it to your bank, as Aimee said, and you might want to keep it with your estate planning documents just in case there's ever a challenge or an issue in relation to that. But
Mm.
yeah, no storing it in your freezer. A digital copy will be just fine.
Good to know. Good to know. Um, I feel like we covered a lot of ground, but do you have any closing remarks in terms of anything that we haven't covered in terms of just understanding the landscape and kind of the challenges, but also the opportunity that people can really harness through a platform like Jointly?
I would just say if you have questions and you're not sure, reach out. You can get started on our website for free and learn more about it before you make a decision. And just maybe to push through some of your discomfort in thinking that it's not for you or that it might be awkward. Because I think this type of conversation and this going through this process can help you avoid even more discomfort later on. So I'd say go for it and yeah, reach out to us if you have any questions.
Great. Oh my gosh. Well, Amanda, Aimee, thank you so much for such an enlightening chat. I learned a lot. And I think it's an incredible platform that you've built, and something that is so needed, and is going to help a lot of people. So I really appreciate your time and your insight on a Friday afternoon, no less.
Thanks. This is our idea of partying, I guess. So yeah, thanks for having us, Lance. It's been great.
I really appreciate it. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Critical. If you enjoyed our discussion, make sure to hit like below and subscribe for more updates from our show. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and go make something happen. We'll see you on the next episode.